So let's talk a little bit about the concept of a scriptable infrastructure. Really, this is one of the core ideas behind the word Devops, if you've ever heard that before. The idea is that in order to get bash and screen and Emacs and Git all set up, we kept running apt-get commands, and for Emacs in particular, we downloaded some local configuration files to get these things to work. And the concept here is you want to think about your setup files as code in their own right. And the way to look at that is, we've got two repositories here. Here's one that's startup-class/setup, and another one startup-class/dotfiles. And earlier what we did was we just SH'd into a machine, we changed the home directory, installed Git, cloned this remote repository, and then ran the setup.sh, and that's how we got everything set up earlier in the lecture. What exactly was setup.sh doing? Well, if we go to that URL and we click setup.sh, we can see that it installed something called the Node Version Manager, which manages multiple versions of Node. That itself was a tool that we used to install version 10.12 of Node and then set it up to use that version. We installed JS Hint, which was the style checker. We installed something called RL wrap for basically making Node a little more user-friendly at the command line. We'll talk about how to do this in a second. Here were the commands to install Emacs. We added a remote repository and added that. And then we also moved our old .files and emacs.d directories if they existed. We send them to backup directories. We cloned the .files repo itself, which is a separate repo, and then we symbolically linked all of these .files, and they're again called .files because they start with a dot, into the home directory. So now let's look at what exactly is .files.git. What were these files? So what are the .files? Setup.git, we use that to set up the EC2 instance itself. We also need to configure your individual environment. And so within that sh script, as we saw, were the commands to pull down .files.git. And let's actually take a look at what the contents of that are over here. So if we look at .files, it's got a bunch of individual files. Screen.rc, bash.rc, custom, bash.rc, and bash profile. We won't go through all of them. If you click them, you can take a look. But for example, if you look at bash.rc, this has commands that define a bash eternal history, which is a very useful snippet. It has aliases and things of this nature, which make it easier to just run common commands. In particular, Node itself is aliased to include RL wrap, which implements a readline mode for it. You can see this URL on Node to get more information on that. If you want to add like user custom code, you go to bash.rc custom. And so this is what the .bashrc file is. Within emacs.d, we've got a number of EL files which configure Emacs. In particular, js-comment and js-config are the ones that are responsible for getting the Node REPL to work. So this is the idea behind .files. Is not only is our setup.sh, that is our setup kit, something that can configure the machine. .files will configure the user environment, and by running them together via this setup.sh script, which first installs all of this stuff and then pulls in .files, we can just programmatically configure an arbitrary EC2 machine with just a few commands. One last thing deserves comment. Within each home directory now, after you've done the setup, you're going to have a file that's created called bash eternal history. Try typing in head.bash eternal history after a little bit, and this is basically a tab limited text file that has every command you've run, as well as information on which directory it was run in, what time it was run, and so on and so forth. So this is very useful because often you will forget some critical command you ran or exactly what flags you invoked something on, and then you can just look at this history and you can get more information on it. In addition, the .files.git defined a bunch of useful aliases. You can type an alias to list those aliases and define new ones. Type man alias and you will, like man space alias, enter, and you will get more information on aliases. So as an exercise for the reader, what you can do is fork and update your .files.git, further customize your dev environment. If you really want to make things completely automated, you can take the EC2 command line tools and in conjunction with the user data script feature, you can actually have them boot up an instance and launch setup.sh so that you don't have to go to aws.amazon.com and click on things like launch instance. That's actually worth doing as an exercise, just on your own time. But even if you decide to still use GUI, you get the idea. Any setup or configuration of a machine is itself code and should be treated like code by keeping the install scripts and config files under version control in a Git repository. And this is one of the core insights and core things you actually need to do a startup, because you're going to be moving from single player mode, where you were coding by yourself, to multiplayer mode. And multiplayer mode requires a reproducible development environment as a very first thing. So nothing should ever be installed on any development machine unless you're just testing it out. If you mean it to be there permanently, you should always put the installation process itself under version control in a Git repository. Okay. So that concludes this lecture. We learned how to use Emacs screen in Git and also how to orchestrate a reproducible dev machine setup.